And I think bill in its modified form will very soon be, report will be coming to the Government of India. We will examine it. And I am very optimistic, maybe in the next session itself, we will be in a position to introduce a new bill, which will give a very good cushion to the foreign investors also, because this dispute resolution will become much quicker and much faster.
There's a deemed arbitration clause also in that bill.
I have already received a report which is under examination.
So we really appreciate your in-depth knowledge of all the things which are happening, all the developments which are taking place on the legal front. And may I request?
I want to say that, but I think I have become a bottleneck because everything is landing on my table and it's just lying there.
Can I request Anna Singh to come forward and present the memento? Vaibhav? Mr. Kaviraj Singh, kindly present the memento, the gift. Yeah. To Mr. Malhotra. He has to leave.
Yeah, I will request the First Lady to give a memento to Mr. P.K. Malhotra.
Thank you very much. We will
request you to give a moment.
Oh, please. So we will have more time to interact on the deliberative solution. Thank you very much. Thank you. My sincere apology, I'm leaving early because I have to rush. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
We've also been joined by Dr. Rajan Natarajan, the Deputy Secretary of State, Maryland State, USA. And I request Dr. Natarajan to say a few words as well.
Thank you. In fact, I'm not a subject matter expert here, but we have some great experts. They're going to talk about the legal system. First of all, I want to thank Indian National Bar Association, and in fact, the law secretary spoke very well and very detailed, and we are expecting some more judges here. And I want to thank Mr. Kaviraj Singh, to put together this program within a very short notice. And I just want to say that our mission is a 10 days trip. In fact, our journey began at Chennai 2 days ago. We had a very successful judicial system mission, and also today we are here since yesterday, and we'll be here tomorrow, and we are heading to China. We have 3 more cities to visit, and so far we are making amazing progress, meeting with various experts in the legal system, and also sharing our experience, knowledge, and ideas. And I'm very happy to join our distinguished delegation member, our First Lady and Judge, Her Excellency Catherine O'Malley, and also Her Excellency our Maryland Supreme Court Chief Justice Mary Ellen Barbara, and also our court expert, State Court Administrator, Ms. Pamela Harris, and also Director of International Affairs, Ms. Anna Yankova is here. And thank you very much for this great opportunity, and definitely they are going to talk in detail about our Maryland court system. And thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you so much. Actually, we have a session whereby our the honorable judges of our Delhi High Court shall be joining for the second session. So we have kept a panel discussion on the judicial processes and the systems of the two countries. So meanwhile, may I request Honorable Catherine O'Malley to say a few words on empowerment of women and protection of women from domestic violence, which is something which is afflicting every nation, depending on, in varying degrees, I would say. And of course, women playing the pivotal role these days in each part of our economic, social, and political fabric. This is an important aspect which we request our Honorable Catherine O'Malley to say a few words on this.
Well, thank you, and thank you for letting me have this opportunity to come and address such an honorable group of attorneys and members of the judiciary. Again, the topic obviously is a topic that not is only a topic that affects women generally in my country, in the United States. When we talk about victims of domestic violence, I'm going to be generally speaking about the women of my country who are victims of domestic violence, although there have been cases of men who have been victims of domestic violence. But throughout the years that I've been a lawyer, as a prosecutor, and now a judge, the ones that we feel are most at risk have been majority of the women. And I know it's a universal international problem, and many of the characteristics of the abused and the abusers are also international, and it's very similar. So let me just begin by saying, it's a problem that covers or is not just victims of domestic violence. Oftentimes people think there's a sort of a stigma, and that it's only women of little means, or women in rural areas, and women with very, very little education. But that's not true. We've seen, and I'm sure you all have seen as well in your great country, women who are of means and women who are educated, who also have become victims of domestic violence. And there's something very, very similar between these victims. They're ashamed. They sort of have many different characteristics of why they do not want to come forward, why they're fearful of coming forward. And I can just tell you that when I started prosecuting these cases back in the 1990s, I was very frustrated because I would have a case where I would finally get a victim to come into court. And it's difficult now to get a victim to come to court, but it was even more difficult when I first started as a prosecutor. So I'd finally had a case where I had a young woman who had been a classic victim of domestic violence, and her husband had beaten her. And at sentencing, the judge didn't impose the sentence that I want, didn't impose any sentence whatsoever other than finding him guilty and slapping him on the wrist. But he went even further to victimize this woman, and he basically blamed her for being a victim and saying that she needed to make a decision, and it was her fault that she didn't decide to leave that family home, and that she probably will continue to get beaten. And he really, really re-victimized this woman again. And I can guarantee you that if he did, and he probably did, abuse her in the future, she was not coming back to the criminal justice system, because the door was shut in her face, and the options were very, very, very little for her then. So I soon learned that we had a lot to do in this area with domestic violence, not only with the judiciary, but beginning with the first responders, the police officers. We needed early on to have them, because they are the ones that arrive at the scene. We needed to do a lot in the area of training the officers, training the prosecutors to handle these special types of victims, because you all probably would agree, if you were a victim of anything, a street robbery, a street assault, or any kind of horrible crime, we would all want to see the perpetrator brought to justice. But these victims of domestic violence don't. And why don't they? Well, that's kind of a complicated thing. I think oftentimes, depending on where they're coming from, whether they do or don't have children, whether they are of means or not, whether they're from a rural area or from a big bustling city, I truly think they're ashamed. And I know from having victims appear before me in court, they often will say that when they come into court, and they're very timid, and they're not as forthcoming with the facts and details because they're ashamed, they're afraid, and they're not really sure what's going to happen as a result. They don't really know if after they leave the courthouse it's going to get better or worse. So again, it's very difficult to get them into court because they're ashamed and embarrassed in many instances. The one thing we do know about domestic abuse, when it's a classic victim of domestic violence, is that the abuse isn't a one-time thing. It's often, it continues, and it could happen day after day after day. It could be once a year. It could be several times a year. They're all different, but they all have similar sorts. The abusers have similar sorts of behavior patterns that we see in the United States, and I'm sure you all see these same traits as well. The one thing we know about the domestic abuser is they want control and they want power. And we've had and I don't know if any of you have seen this in your work, but there's been a wheel that's been developed by advocates against domestic violence that kind of shows and sort of an easier way to understand what's going on in this dynamic, because everyone says, like the judge I was in front of years ago, what are you doing in this relationship? Who in their right mind would stay in a relationship with someone who is not only physically abusing them, but oftentimes, most times, and always mentally abusing them and degrading them? So there's 7 different factors that sort of create this or complete this wheel of power and control. One is there's oftentimes a lot of intimidation, and that's whether it's a look or a gesture, abusing of the pets, something small, something subtle that we wouldn't understand, but in the context of that relationship between the abuser and the abused, it's very meaningful to the victim. There's also the emotional abuse, in front of children sometimes, degrading the woman, calling her fat, calling her stupid, making her feel very, very poor about herself. Isolation is another huge factor, not letting her out to see her friends, constantly tracking where she's going, who she's with, whether she is allowed or not allowed to have a job, the friends that she can see, and even the family members. Oftentimes we see that they're isolated from their family, so the family members aren't really getting to see any of the bruises or seeing any of the mental abuse. Using the children, if the couple have children, using the children in many different variety of ways, by threatening to take the children away or actually even threatening to kill them. And sadly, in our country, we have had cases where the abuser has done that ultimate thing because the abuser knows, especially after the woman's left, if he kills the child, that is the ultimate abuse. So we have seen that in sadly too many cases. Also using male privilege by sort of defining what her role in the house is and what his role in the house is. I work, you cook, you clean, and if it's not up to my standards, I get to decide what the penalty is. So it's sort of saying he's the master of the castle. Economic abuse, which is one of, I think, a major factor in why a victim stays in one of these relationships. If that victim does not have any economic means, and if she is reliant on the abuser, not only for herself, but if they have children, to support the children, to feed and shelter the children, oftentimes it's not going to be easy to get that victim into court. And then certainly the coercion and threats of violence and actual physical violence are all means of power and control. The victim walks on an eggshell, if you will, knowing that if she doesn't, comply with these demands, if she does seek out friends and family, if she doesn't have the house clean for whatever reason, maybe she's 9 months pregnant and had to, take a break that day, she knows that there's the threat of the violence ratcheting up even more so. So these are the classic sort of behavior types that an abuser will use, and they've sort of developed these all from looking at incidences when they study lethality after a victim of domestic violence has been sadly, in many cases, murdered. They have, Jackie Campbell is a wonderful anthropologist who in the United States has studied these different factors that show who's really at risk in these cases. Not everyone is, but when all of these factors are combined, what we can do to help these women seek shelter. So that's when we talk about in the legal system, well, what can we do about this? This is a real social problem, but how does a judge step in and get involved? How does a lawyer get involved, and how does law enforcement? So that's when I come back to this whole training, this whole education, and it starts with the police officers, and in Baltimore City, our officers are trained to recognize the differences between this victim and a victim of a random crime, and what services they can advise them to seek out. It also is in our prosecuting offices. In most jurisdictions, in the biggest jurisdictions in Baltimore City and Baltimore County, we have specialized dockets that handle the domestic violence cases, and specialized prosecutors that understand the different nuances and try to work hard to relate to these victims so that they're not coming into court, standing in a long line, and sort of being shrugged and told, hey, you sit down, I'll get to your case when I'm ready, because that's the way it used to be. And oftentimes those victims would get scared, see the defendant in the courtroom, and just get up and leave. So there's a process now so that when they do finally come forward and get to the courthouse, that the prosecutors are trained in how to treat their cases in a different, much more sensitive way. We also have judicial training in this area for our judges in the state of Maryland. When they come after becoming a judge, they have to take one whole day course in learning how to handle these types of cases and learning how to handle domestic violence protective order cases, which are what we see a lot in Baltimore City District Court. I do those cases on a daily basis. So not learning how to be an advocate for the victim, but learning what sorts of scenarios that they're dealing with. And again, listening to the different nuances of these cases and understanding why a victim might say one thing in a domestic violence case that's very odd or seems very odd, as opposed to what one might say as a regular victim in sort of a random crime. So that's been, I think, crucial in trying to help these victims break away from the power and control that the abusers have. We also have been creating specific laws, and I just mentioned that we do protective order cases in the United States, and I believe they're also done in India as well, and that's the restraining orders, if you will. That's kind of a universal name for them. We call them protective order cases, and that's where a victim who has an intimate relationship with the abuser can come to court and just by herself request a temporary protective order. And in that temporary protective order, if the judge finds reasonable grounds, so if the victim comes in and says, I was threatened, he said he was going to, we are in an intimate relationship, so they qualify. He threatened to kill me. I know he has access to a weapon, or maybe he just pushed me and shoved me down the steps. Whatever the reasoning is, if there's been some sort of an assault or stalking and or abuse, then the court can enter into a temporary order, and we can grant use and possession of the home. So we can order the abuser to vacate for 1 week, so because they get to come in and respond as well. But for that 1 week period, the court can order the vacating the property, custody of the children, use and possession of a family vehicle, and not emergency family maintenance is really done more so on the end if there's a finding after a full hearing. So then after that's done, we do have a full hearing. If the respondent is served, he gets to come in or she gets to come in. It's usually a he, as I say. And the judge can either enter it to a consent, which we see oftentimes if there's a dueling criminal case, because if they come in and there's already, based on those same allegations of the threat of a gun or whatever, if there's a dueling criminal case, they're really risking testifying under oath and saying things that could incriminate them. And as a judge, I have to advise any respondent that comes in and ask them if they are facing these criminal cases, pending cases, because if they're sworn and they say things, as you all know, they could be incriminating themselves. And so they have the Fifth Amendment right to remain silent, and I advise them. So after a hearing, if I do in fact find clear and convincing evidence that there, actually no, we just changed it. Didn't we change our standard? October 1st, it'll be changed to beyond a reasonable doubt. Oh, I'm sorry, it's the civil preponderance of evidence, because these orders are civil, they're not criminal. As I said, they can have the dueling, but in the civil restraining order, it's then the preponderance standard that we have. So if I find by preponderance of the evidence that there has been abuse, then I can go through the order and go through visitation, vacating the property, allowing the respondent to get property back at the home with the accompaniment of a police officer. I can order the weapon, firearm, be seized and forfeited while the order is in effect, and then I go through all of that and order it. But I have to tell you, and I don't know if you've had the same experience in your state, I advise the petitioner, who's again oftentimes the woman, I advise her, this is a piece of paper that you've just been given. So now you've got your protective order. When you walk out of the courtroom, you need to come up with some other safety plan. And we have advocates in the building right across the hallway from the courtroom where the orders are given, with the advocates that can help them come up with a safety plan. Because again, a lot of times when you're an abuser and you've been using and asserting this power and control for probably many, many years, some judge telling you that you can't see your kids and you can't come to the house and you've got to forfeit your weapon and you can't go to her place of employment and you can't call her, that's not necessarily going to resonate oftentimes too well. So we have a lot of people who violate the protective orders, and there is a separate criminal charge for that. And we've had cases, sad cases in Baltimore, where we had a woman walk out of the courthouse with an order, and her husband came up and slashed her throat and killed her right there in front of the courthouse. So I'm always strongly urging them, again, not as an advocate, because as a judge you can't, but just to say, just want to tell you, it's a piece of paper, and if you need some additional support or help, go across the hall and talk to our advocates at the House of Ruth. And that sometimes, hopefully, saves their life. We also do some staggering. We don't let the victim who just got her order walk out the courthouse with the defendant following behind her. We require the bailiffs to secure the respondent in the courtroom. He's not allowed to leave until she goes down, obtains her order. Once she obtains her order, then he's allowed to go down and get his order. So we found that that has sometimes helped, create some sort of safety, if you will, at least while they're in the confines of the courthouse, especially after that tragedy a few years ago. So I think in order to empower these victims of domestic violence, there's so many things that need to be done some have been done, but so much more needs to be done in our country. I mean, emotionally, physically, and financially is really where they need to be in a stable sort of emotional, physical, and financial way in order for them to break away from the violence. And by providing, I think, a culture that is more receptive to that, I think we really help empower these women so that it isn't the society's norm and it's not an acceptable thing. And I'll just end with a short, I think, a positive thing. Again, I'm in Baltimore City. It's a very busy city. It's a great city. We have a large population, not nearly as large as Delhi. You would think it was quite small, but it's our busiest city in the state of Maryland. And my daughter's a public school teacher in the city, first graders, and she told me a story about two little kids were having a conversation. One was a boy, one was a girl. The little boy didn't like what the little girl said, so he sort of pushed her. He didn't hurt her, but he pushed her, and his friend tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Hey, you can go to jail for hitting girls." So we thought that was sort of positive, that here's a little 6-year-old that is now aware that it is not accepted to hit girls. So hopefully he learned that at home, and that's something that he's learned it in the community. But I think that's the message we've got to start, is that it's not okay whether you're married to somebody or living with somebody and having children with them. It's not okay to abuse them. So thank you for having me here today, and I look forward to hearing from all of you and from our future or further speakers, our chief and His Excellency, Honorable Gary Baer.
Thank you so much. I thank Her Excellency, Catherine O'Malley, for giving her impassioned how she's handled various cases and her experiences and hands-on handling of different situations concerning women. I believe there are a lot of commonalities between US and India with regard to domestic violence, but I think out here it is more than the physical threat to life. It is more often the struggle for social and economic survival, because lots of women are not working, they're not independent. So ultimately that is used as a tool, and the women opt to stay on in an abusive relationship in order to continue living, simply living on in a life that they know well. In India, a great move forward has been made in 2005 by giving equal property rights to women for the first time. And this, of course, has, again, economic power translates into social power. And this is how I think India is still progressing further to realize equal rights. Although in India, we've had women at the top positions from time immemorial. And with that, I just like to break up for a tea break, and we can all probably interact outside over a tea session. And thank you so much.
So thank you for having me.
Bye.